Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our special program today with Paula Hawkins in conversation with author Laura McHugh about slow fire burning. Please let us know in the chat box where you're tuning in from. We love to see what cities and states are represented. See you all clicking in as the numbers go up, up, up. Ooh, we've got California, New York, great. Thank you for tuning in. We've got quite a few people checked in now. Thanks for letting us know where you're all from. I'm going to turn off my camera, as will my co-hosts, and we will turn this event over to Ann Woodbeck from Excelsior Bay Books and get the party started. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Woodbeck with Excelsior Bay Books in Excelsior, Minnesota. And we are one of 6 locally owned independent bookstores sponsoring today's event. We're joined today by Mystery to Me in Madison, Wisconsin, Rakestraw Books in Danville, California, Raven Bookstore in Lawrence, Kansas, Skylark Bookshop in Columbia, Missouri, and Valley Bookseller in Stillwater, Minnesota. Now, here's Alex George, owner of Skylark Bookshop.
And thank you very much. Good afternoon, I guess. Good morning, everybody. Good evening for some people too, is probably. My job today is a wonderful one, which is to introduce Laura McHugh. I first met Laura around the time when her first novel, The Weight of Blood, was published, and I thought, well, she seems very nice. And then I went home and I read the book. Well, I inhaled it really in 1 or 2 sittings, and I found myself reevaluating my initial impression of her. As you're about to discover, Laura is one of the nicest people on the planet, which makes her ability to craft these dark, twisty psychological thrillers for which she has become so well known all the more deeply disturbing. But craft them she does, and we're all the better for it. Laura has written 4 internationally best-selling novels: The Weight of Blood, Arrowwood, The Wolf Wants In, and most recently, the brilliant What's Done in Darkness. And I think that all of the bookstores have put links to What's Done in Darkness in the chat, so you can go there and purchase that if you would like to do so, and I highly recommend that you do. It's also, I'm very pleased to report, Laura's birthday today. So happy birthday, Laura. She's a wonderful writer and a wonderful human, and I'm completely thrilled that she is here to interview Paula today. And I'm now going to pass this over to Pamela Klinger-Horn from Valley Bookseller.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm sure many of you have read Alex's work. He is a well-known author, most recently of the delightful and gorgeous novel, The Paris Hours. So I'm going to quickly stop this other video here. There we go. And it's my pleasure and honor today to welcome Paula Hawkins. I'm sure many of you know her name. She is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of The Girl on the Train and Into the Water. Both books were #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, selling over 20 million copies internationally. The Girl on the Train was also adapted into a major motion picture and spent 97 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, an incredible stretch. Paula Hawkins is now a household name and is synonymous with the psychological thriller genre. It's our honor and pleasure today to be bringing Paula Hawkins into your homes. Her new novel, A Slow Fire Burning, is more than a crime novel. A Slow Fire Burning is not only a thriller, but a layered examination of the events that shape us into who we are and motivate our future actions. The Associated Press says that it simmers like a good curry, layered with spices, percolating for over 300 pages, leaving readers sated at the end. How long can secrets smolder before they explode into flame? Let's listen to Paula Hawkins and Laura McHugh discuss the deliciously seductive slow fire burning and find out. Please welcome both of these fine authors to our virtual stage today. Thank you so much, Paula Hawkins and Laura McHugh.
Hi, thank you so much.
Hi, Paula.
Hello, how are you?
Great. I just want to say first, congratulations on this new book. I think it's already a bestseller. Is that right? Like right out of the gate?
It is. It's #1 in the UK at the moment. I haven't got the USA sales figures yet, but fingers are crossed.
Yes, I'm sure it will be. So congratulations. I'm just so thrilled to be talking to you today about A Slow Fire Burning. And I love this book. It's a brilliant book. And I have more questions than I can possibly get to. So we will dive right in, but we will save time at the end for some audience Q&A. So everyone can be, coming up with their questions while we're talking. And for those of you who haven't read it yet, you're in for such a treat. I'm very excited for you to read it. I wanted to start off with one thing that's so wonderful about this book, and Pamela touched on it a little bit. I mean, it's more than just a, brilliant mystery and thriller. It's a really character-driven novel. And you've created this cast of characters that's so complex and compelling, and they have these rich backstories, and they're all a bit haunted by these past traumas. And I was particularly drawn to the character named Laura, not just because of her name, but from the very first chapter, she just captures you. And she's a very unique character. I wondered if you might talk a little bit about the characters, either Laura, who's one of the main characters, or if there's another character that's, you think might be a fan favorite or that was a favorite of yours in writing this book.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Laura is sort of the heart of the book, I think it's fair to say, and she's certainly where the story started for me, where the ideas sort of started. So Laura is a young woman who had a difficult time in her life. She's in her 20s. She was knocked off her bike as a child and left with some physical disabilities, some minor physical disabilities, but her main issue is that she has this condition called disinhibition, which means that she kind of has no filter. She says and does kind of inappropriate things. She can be very impetuous, reckless. She can lose her temper really quickly. And this means that she kind of struggles in life. She struggles to keep a job, keep a relationship, anything like that. And I was just fascinated by, I'm always fascinated by characters who sort of live a little bit on the outside, who don't quite fit in society, who are quite harshly judged. And I think this is a big thing with Laura, is that she feels very harshly judged because people make assumptions about her because of her behavior without knowing the context. And so I was fascinated by this person who is reckless, but also vulnerable. She also has, she's got a good heart. She has a generous spirit, but she makes terrible decisions all the time, and she does things that she oughtn't to do. But I think she's one of those characters, possibly quite like Rachel and the Girl on the Train, that the reader can follow around. You might not love her straight away. I'm glad that you did, but I think you can understand the struggles that she's going through, and you want to follow her through her story and find out, is she going to overcome these things that are confronting her?
Yes, absolutely. And I loved how you took this character who has so much damage in her past. And like you said, she makes all these terrible decisions, gets herself into a lot of trouble. She almost, she can't help it with the disinhibition, but you made her so human and so endearing. And I really loved seeing how she developed and watching her story throughout the novel. She was definitely my favorite. I mean, I liked some of the other characters as well, but she was fantastic. So you mentioned that Laura was maybe a little bit of a starting point for the story. Were there any other elements that kind of contributed to the origin of this idea? Was there something else with, I don't know, like a crime or a setting or anything else that kind of lent to that story?
Yeah, so I mean, how I generally start with all of my novels is with a character, but obviously a character isn't enough. You have to have a story to tell with them. And it's often the way for me that I know that I want to write about someone, but I don't know exactly what story to tell. And that is often suggested to me by setting, by location. So the setting of this novel is this area of central London around the Regent's Canal. It's very close to where I live in London, my London flat. There's a canal that runs right through the heart of the city, and there's a lot of little houseboats on this canal, so people live there. There's some quite grand houses on either side, sort of that will be worth millions of pounds. There's also quite a lot of social housing. Because this was an area of London that was quite heavily bombed in the war. So there's a real like mishmash of old and new, and everybody kind of crammed in together. But it was the houseboats really that I was intrigued by. You can walk along the towpath at the edge of the canal, and you can kind of peer in through houseboats if you're a nosy person like I am. And I do that thing of imagining like what sort of people live here. And every now and again you will find one of the boats that's sort of a bit dilapidated, it looks almost abandoned. They're sort of sinking into the water a bit. And I did sort of think there could be anything inside one of these, and you wouldn't know. They look like they've not been touched for years. It's like when you find, an abandoned caravan in the woods, you're like, you just immediately, well, for those of us who think that way, your mind immediately goes to a very dark place. So it was those two elements. I had this character and I had the setting, and I kind of put them together, and then I started to craft a story from that.
I love that. I love to hear those origin stories, how the ideas kind of come together from these little seeds. So something I thought was interesting, something else with the characters. In this story, it's a man that is killed. Daniel is found murdered at the beginning of the book, and it's women who are really the prime suspects in this murder. And so often, in thrillers, it's the other way around. There's a female victim, and you have these men. But in this case, a lot of the focus really is on these women in this story. They're a huge part of the story. And, there's the male victim. I just wondered if you had thought about that consciously at all, or if it just kind of turned out that way.
Well, I mean, it was the story that I wanted to tell, happened to be a case where the murder victim was a young man. But I have been thinking about it a lot, I think, about the way we write crime, the kind of crime we read, the fact that it does too often. There is a beautiful naked dead girl on page 1. And, often she's kind of a bit thrown away. We don't even, in a lot of what I would say, like, less thought-provoking crime on television or in books, you don't even care about that person particularly. And that's awful, I think, that use of just a female body as a puzzle to be solved. So I did kind of think about that. And there is stuff in this book about how we write crime. There is a novelist in the novel who has written a crime novel. So it was something that I was thinking about. I'm not necessarily saying it's better that there's a dead man rather than a dead woman, but it's just maybe thinking about the way those bodies are used and the way we talk about those bodies and the way those bodies are presented. Why is it that it always has to be a young woman? Why is it that we're so interested in those kind of awful stories where a young woman is terrified at in the opening credits? So yeah, it was something I was thinking about, definitely.
Yes, I love that. I loved what you did with that. And I thought all of that you're speaking about really came through in the novel. There were some very neat things about the structure of this book that I really enjoyed and wanted to ask you a little bit about. I love how the book begins. Starts with an excerpt from a book that we will discover is sort of a book within the book. And one of the characters is reading this book at the beginning. And I really loved how this all came together. And I was wondering, it was such a clever thing that you did. And it's fascinating as you're reading and you kind of begin to see the part that this book within the book plays within the story as a whole. And so, how did you come up with that? Where did that idea come from? And did you know from the beginning how it was all going to connect with this book within the book?
I didn't actually. That was something I sort of thought about as I was writing it. I knew, it's quite difficult to talk about without giving things away, but anyway, I did, I wanted this character, Theo, he's sort of the uncle of the dead man, is a novelist, and he's written a book. And I then thought that it was like an opportunity to use what he had written as kind of a device in the novel, and it tells you something about some of the other characters. It tells you something about Theo himself. It's also, as we were just talking about, it's a way of me kind of thinking about how we write crime, because Theo's novel does kind of, well, when we get deep into it, it is kind of a bit bloody and titillating, I think. So it serves kind of a function to reveal something about Theo himself, but also it's important for the plot. And that was something that just came to me while I was writing it, while I was writing the novel. I mean, I didn't immediately know what I was going to do with it, and actually it was probably one of the trickier parts of writing this book, was getting those sections of the book within the book to fit nicely and not to kind of disrupt the general flow. I like that kind of thing in a novel. It's maybe a bit tricksy, but I do enjoy that. Yeah, but you do need to get it right, otherwise I think it's just annoying for the reader. So I did have to work quite carefully to make that fit in and to make it serve a real purpose, I think, in the novel.
Yes, I loved it. I thought it came together beautifully, the way that everything is sort of revealed and you understand how it's all connected and what it has to do with the story. I love that. So that was very well done. I mean, you mentioned it was a little bit tricky, trying to get that right and fit all of that in there. And I wondered also about the multiple viewpoints in the novel. I love that it's told from, multiple viewpoints, these various characters in the story. But I wondered if it was difficult, layering all those narratives, and if, how you went about doing that, if you had some sort of methodology for keeping everything straight, or if you just kind of, wrote what you were going to write and then piece it together.
Yeah, there are multiple viewpoints, not as many as there were in my last novel. So this was less complicated than that one. But so they're all third person rather than first person, which I think is slightly easier. But you do still need to get a sense of every person as a real individual. And you do need to kind of decide. I think the important thing is to decide the order in which the reader needs to learn about certain things, and how things should connect, how everyone should connect to each other. And that is tricky. And it does, as far as I'm concerned, it just takes time. I don't have a methodology. I just write it, I edit, I shift things around, I edit some more. There was at some point, I have a board above my desk, and I had sort of little cards with what was going on with every character and every chapter, and I sort of moved those around so I could sort of, I think at some point it helps to have a visual sense, not from the beginning because I don't know it at the beginning, but while you're in the thick of it, so it helps to have a visual sense of it. But yeah, as I say, it's maybe one of the reasons it takes me so long to write a novel, is that I don't have a methodology for that kind of thing. I just have to sort of figure it out as I'm going through the book.
Sure. And I mean, has that changed at all from book to book? Has your process with that evolved at all? Or you just kind of, let it grow organically? Or I was just curious, this is your third book, if things had changed at all, if they were different.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all different. I think the way you write, for me, the way I write every novel is slightly different. I think The Girl on the Train seemed to me to be a much more straightforward kind of affair. I think I sometimes look back on it with rose-tinted spectacles, actually, The Girl on the Train. I definitely, it took me less time to write it. It was only a year, the writing of The Girl on the Train. I think that might have just been the pressure of I needed to get it done because I had no money and I needed an income. So it may have been that. It did seem to me at the time to be a bit more straightforward. I had a very strong idea of where I was going in that novel, which I have had less so in the last two. I've needed to figure them out a bit more. So no, I don't have a method, and I don't think it's getting easier, which I assumed it would, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Sorry, it gets worse.
Isn't that unfortunate? You think it might
is.
be, and then like, no, each time it's just a little bit different. But yeah, I totally understand that feeling, looking back at the first novel and thinking, gosh, how did I do that? It wasn't easy at the time, but looking back, like, wow, somehow I did that, made it feel easier, seem easy, but
yeah.
I got it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, this is kind of structurally related as well. We touched on this a little bit, the reveals in the story. For me, one of the most wonderful things about reading a thriller is these little reveals, these moments when you learn something shocking about a character's backstory, or a little puzzle piece falls into place in the mystery. And, sometimes the reader is like, oh my God, you know, these little moments can be very impactful. And I think you do such a great job of that. And I noticed it especially in this novel. And I was wondering, you know, do any of these come to you in advance? I'm thinking maybe not, but, you know, do these just kind of come to you as you're writing the story and as the story is fermenting, these pop up to you? Because I know to the reader, they can seem very, very shocking and exciting moments, but I just wondered if they shock and surprise you sometimes as well, or if you kind of plan for them.
I think there are definitely some ideas that come to you while you're in the middle of the story and you're like, oh yeah, I could do that, couldn't I? You know, and those are great moments, I think, when you're like, oh yes, that would work. I think it's one of the big, like the big skills of writing a good thriller is knowing when to drop in those little pieces of information. And sometimes they can be a massive reveal, or sometimes they're just a little hint that something's off, or oh, you need to look in that direction now. You know, that kind of thing of suggesting something to the reader and then maybe suggesting them in a different direction. But yeah, the pacing of that and the spacing that out, so that, because you don't want the readers to feel confused. They need to have enough information that they're like, oh, I can see where this is going. But you do want them to be surprised. So that to me is the big, that's one of the main challenges of writing a good thriller, is getting satisfying twists that don't feel forced, that don't feel like they've come out of nowhere. You're not sort of like somebody like crowbarring something in. Everything has to feel like it's there for a reason and it works and it's been earned in a way. So yeah, but again, for me, that just takes a really long time. And sometimes you know exactly when you need to do that. And sometimes you've got to just work at it and figure it out. And as you said, I think a lot of the best ideas come when you're right in the middle of the novel and you have a plan for something, but it just suggests itself to you because you're kind of in the moment and you're really in those characters' heads. And that's when the best ideas come, I think.
Oh yeah, and it's so, I mean, I'm excited for everyone to get their hands on this and read these. I think you have so many great moments in there where the pieces fall into place. You're like, oh my God. So I just love that. And you know, it's a thrilling book. There are a lot of serious themes, underlying themes in this story. And a lot of the characters are, you know, kind of haunted by these losses or traumas in their past. And there's a lot about like family bonds and the complexities of those family relationships and how hard that can be. And so there are a lot of these serious things coming up in the story. I loved what you did with that. And I was just wondering, you know, what you thought were the most important sort of underlying themes in here. And did you set out to write about any of these things in particular? Or did they really just surface naturally from the story and from these characters?
Yeah, I think mostly they surface kind of naturally from the characters that I'm thinking about. So I'm not one of the people who sits down and thinks, right, I really want to write about a particular theme. There are nevertheless things that sort of seem to occur in all my books. I do often write about women's lives, the way women kind of fit in society or don't fit, people who, I still think that despite all the progress we've made, there is an expectation that women be pretty and pleasing and likable and all these things. And I'm quite interested in women who aren't pretty or pleasing or likable, who are difficult or broken or angry. And just writing about what that means for you, what that means for your life. So that's something that I seem to return to a lot. I seem to have an obsession with outsiders, with people who just don't fit. There is a lot of loss and trauma in this book, and I guess again something that I always return to is very ordinary people whose lives have been somehow knocked off track by something which could be very small, like an accident, something that could happen to anyone. I think it's that relatability that I like, that idea of that could have been me had I turned a different corner at a different point in my life. And familial relationships gone wrong for some sad reason rather than a dramatic reason, you know, something small that's driven a wedge between you and somebody in your family. I'm always interested in how that plays out over the very long term. I think that's the big part of this book, is that yes, there are losses and there are traumas, but I'm not sort of examining the immediate aftermath. I'm examining what happens to somebody 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, if something has happened to you that it has shaped you in some way, and what sort of shape does that take? so yeah, these are the things I seem to come back to over and over. I think there are some new ideas and new things in this book. There's a lot about storytelling and about this idea of who owns an idea. Can you own an idea, or can you, who has the right to tell a story? I was thinking very much about myself and many writers, I think, we sort of borrow things from life all the time. Somebody tells you something and you're like, oh, that's interesting. And you go away and you process it and you change it and you create something new out of it. But, where is the line that you draw? What wouldn't you take? There is a character in this book who definitely for me crosses a very big line. But he thinks it's fine. He thinks he has a perfect right to take something and use it because he's an artist. And so that's something that sort of ownership ideas, that sort of ownership of stories, and what it does to you if you feel that your story has been taken away from you in some way, or told by someone else, or told in the wrong way. So yeah, there's a whole load of things, but I do think those things are generally generated by character, although in some sense they must be at the forefront of my mind. But I definitely don't sit down and think, right, I want to write this theme, which I think some writers do, but for me it just doesn't really it doesn't occur in that way.
Yes, and it all came through very naturally. It didn't come through at all like you were, you're laying down, I'm going to, examine things, but it so beautifully, comes to the surface that you're really thinking about those things as you're reading the story. And I loved what you did. You're just talking about, ownership of an idea. Who owns that? How far do you go? I think we all think about that as crime writers. And I loved how you were able to show the perspective of what does it feel like when that idea has been stolen from you? So it's not just the person who is taking some idea, it's the person who's had their idea taken, and what impact that has and how that feels to be robbed of your own story. And I thought that was a really neat aspect of the plot. So I did want to ask about the title, A Slow Fire Burning. I mean, it's just in this gorgeous cover. And I thought the title was so fitting. It's a really good title. I didn't know if you wanted to talk at all about kind of what that title means to you. I was also just kind of curious, did you have a hard or easy time coming up with the title? Like, do you struggle to find perfect titles, or do you get input, from others to kind of help out?
Yeah, I mean, this one I didn't have. Had different working titles, none of which I was happy with at the beginning. I did want to say something about fire. There are various mentions of fire in the book, and I was thinking about this because it is about anger, it's about revenge, it's about this thing that burns away. But I couldn't sort of think of the right thing. And then I read an article on a literary blog about the way the destruction of books in libraries of old books, and it's something that happens because the acid actually within the paper starts to it makes the pages brittle, and they just start to crumble away, and that process is referred to as slow fire. And I was like, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it struck me as the perfect metaphor, because in this book, there's all these people with these things inside them, guilt or shame or self-loathing or the lust for revenge or whatever it is, that's eating away at them really slowly. So it's like the seeds of your own destruction lie within you. And so yeah, slow fire. I was, how sometimes it just comes to you like, oh my God, that's great. And so yeah, that's where the title came from. I must say, your titles are amazing. You have great book titles. I love that. The Wolf One's in is just such a good book title. Yeah, but I do kind of struggle. I think The Girl on the Train was always The Girl on the Train. That was kind of its working title. It was almost something that I didn't even think about. That was just when I was talking to my agent, I was trained, I'm going to write this Girl on the Train book. But after that, I've struggled with them. I think titles are a tricky thing, actually.
Oh, I mean, I agree. And thank you for your kind comment on my titles, but I struggle with all of those. Usually don't have a title until the very last minute. I except one of them, I just kept my working title thinking it would change, and we never thought of something else. Yeah, those can be hard. But well, now that I know about that term about the books disintegrating, I had no idea. That's very interesting. And it makes the title even more meaningful. So glad you shared that with us. I do have a couple of questions that are a little less serious, maybe. I mean, still serious questions, but I was curious about your writing habits. And I think people are often just interested in how writers work. And I wonder, do you have a specific location? Do you have to sit at a desk? Do you listen to music or have certain like snacks or drinks or like a pet that keeps you company while you work, or just kind of what's a writing day like for you?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm very dull. I do just sit at my desk. I don't like to listen to music. In fact, I like complete silence, and it's a bit of a thorn of contention with my partner who listens to music all the time. So, yeah, so I sit at my desk. I tend to write in the mornings until like maybe mid-afternoon. I always run out of steam. Then I'll do some reading or do other things. I don't have any pets, very sadly, at the moment. But yeah, I'm not one of those people who goes to cafes or libraries or anything like that. I like solitude, silence. I'd like to concentrate. I find it actually really difficult to write. Some people can write in their hotel room, in the departure lounge at the airport, all that, and I can't. I can kind of make notes, but actually, in order to get good sentences on the page, I need to be focused, head down. It's work. It's not fun. I mean, sometimes it's fun as well, but generally, this is work. You're doing your job now.
Oh yeah, and sometimes any distraction can really take you out of that momentum when you're writing. I think so.
Yeah.
I do. I get.
Also, I think if you're writing thrillers with quite convoluted plots, you do need to be concentrating to keep everything in your head. It's not something that's kind of easy to hold in there at once.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you do have leisure time, when you get to read, what sorts of books do you like to read? And are there any particular books that have been, kind of influential on you and your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I do read a lot. I don't tend to read thrillers very much when I'm writing, but I do love a good thriller. There are certain authors that I think I always refer to when I'm asked about this, and they are Kate Atkinson, who's a British literary and crime writer. Pat Barker is one I really love. Margaret Atwood was very influential on me. Donna Tartt, particularly The Secret History, was a big book for me when I was when I think it was in my 20s when I read that, and I was just blown away by what she did in that book. These days, a lot of my favorites are American crime writers, people like Megan Abbott and Laura Littman and Attica Locke. I loved Liz Moore's book Long Bright River that was out a couple of years ago. So yeah, and then obviously the more kind classics, Barbara Vine, Shirley Jackson. I love Shirley Jackson. I do like a bit of horror. Well, horror every now and again. I don't kind of watch it very much anymore, but I do like to read horror every now and again. So yeah, all sorts.
Yeah. And I love Shirley Jackson is one of my favorites. I love We've Always Lived in the Castle. I reread that one probably once a year. I love. I
mean, her sentences are so beautiful, and the opening lines of "We've Always Lived in the Castle" just like, oh my god, so beautiful and so scary. Yeah, she's amazing.
And so for you, what is it that makes a story satisfying to you, most satisfying? And that can be either as a reader or as a writer, like in your own work, and just. I mean, do you want it to is it most important that it has a great emotional impact, or do you like it to have a great twist, or do you like it to have, characters you're really invested in? Is there anything in particular that makes a story just really satisfying to you?
I think for me, it is mostly about character. I think, if there are characters I really believe in, I don't have to like them, but psychologically astute, believable, real people who I can kind of, who I'm just compelled by. I think that's where it always gets me. I love, everyone loves a great twist, obviously. It's so wonderful, a twist that's done very well, that is genuinely surprising or shocking, or that changes. I mean, if we think about what Gillian Flynn did in Gone Girl, where she changes the whole, you think you've read something and you're like, oh my God, I haven't read that at all. Brilliant. But I think those kind of things are they're very hard to do. They're quite rare to do well. And I think lots of twists can feel a bit forced and almost artificial, whereas a good character will never feel forced. A good character is just a good character. So that's, I think, what I generally look for. But, you know, sometimes it is just beautiful sentences that someone like Cormac McCarthy, for example, you can just read it. I mean, it's bleak, 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 and violent and shocking, but the sentences are so beautiful that you can sort of just get lost in it. So there's lots of things, but yes, for me, it'll always come down to character.
Oh, yes. And you did, like I said, I know I've said it several times now, but you've done such a beautiful job with these characters.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
I love that they're, you know, hear all the conversations about likable and unlikable characters, but these characters, they're just, I was just so drawn to them. You know, they were so interesting and so multifaceted and complex. And I just loved how you were able to, you know, get us to really feel something for these damaged characters and really be invested and really care what happened to them. And it was just such a triumph of this book. So I really loved that. And we are drawing sort of close to our end time. We'll switch to audience Q&A very soon here.
Mhm.
I just wanted to know, is there anything that you would like to tell readers about this book that we haven't covered? Anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to say about this book?
Ooh, I don't know. I think we've covered most of the things I would like to talk about. I guess, yeah, because what I talk about, talk about is character and setting, and I think we've covered loads.
Oh, good. I tried to squeeze it all in. Like,
Good, yes.
all of these questions.
I'm always thrown by that. I'm like, what else is that saying? Yeah. No. Let's get audience questions.
Well, this has been such a pleasure. I've enjoyed this so much. I'm so
you.
glad to get to talk about this.
Really lovely to talk to you. Thank you.
Yes, and this book is wonderful. I'm excited for everyone to read it. I think they're all going to love it. And I think we will transition now over to some audience Q&A.
Again, happy birthday to Laura.
Thank you so much.
Happy birthday, Laura.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Barnard. I own Rakestraw Books in Danville, California, and I'm going to field questions from the audience. It's nice to see you again, Paula.
Great to see you.
And congratulations on the new book. So this question is from Dale. Is there anything specific that draws you to writing the thriller genre?
You know, I think it's just kind of my naturally dark sensibility, really. The kinds of, I mean, I read crime, but I'm always also drawn to darker novels, literary fiction. The books I tend to read tend to have tragedy or crime or something at their heart. I don't read an awful lot of like funny, light-hearted books. It is tragedy for some reason is the thing that compels me, the way people respond to trauma and tragedy. So it's for me, you know, a natural fit. I also think writing crime is Megan Abbott was talking about this. It's like, why would you write anything else? You've got all the conflict and the drama there. It's kind of on a plate, and you have this amazing structure, and you can write about anything within it, but you're immediately all that, you know, blood on the carpet, backs to the wall. You've got all those elements that a novelist wants in a crime novel.
Right. I remember reading once that crime fiction is also our most moral fiction.
That's true too.
Which I think is interesting. What are your feelings about film adaptations, including those of your work?
I think I was actually really happy with the film adaptation of The Girl on the Train. I know that a lot of readers were upset about, well, not upset about it, but were annoyed that it was set in New York rather than in London. I get why they were, because I get what they wanted to see. They wanted to see their train commute, that everybody thought it was their own train commute. I think the adaptation was, I actually think they did a really good job. They stayed really true to the darkness at the heart of the novel, and Emily Blunt did such a great job as Rachel. Justin Theroux was genuinely chilling. There were some amazing performances in there as well. But as a reader, it's very rare for me to actually like an adaptation of a book that I've loved. I can think of like a handful, maybe. I remember thinking No Country for Old Men was done well, and that Atonement was done well. But generally, I think most readers will recognize that. They'll go, you know, you see it and you're like, oh, it wasn't like that at all. They've cast all the wrong people. You know, you get really annoyed with it. But it's got to be somebody else's interpretation, hasn't it? So.
I always, you know, people say very piously in the bookstore all the time, oh, but the book is always better. And I then, of course, natural contrarian that I am, I always want to kick back with, well, Amadeus, The Godfather,
The Godfather,
and
exactly.
Stand By Me.
Oh right, I don't think I've ever read the story that Stand By Me comes from.
I mean, it's a wonderful story, but it's such an amazing film.
It is an amazing
So
film. I love that film.
yeah. How do you, this is from Pat Smith, how do you convincingly find a place for a murder to occur without it being caught on camera or by someone's phone in today's times?
You know, CCTV and mobile phones have made life very difficult for crime novelists and presumably for criminals too. So I guess, I think in my books, people often lose their phones and you know, you just have to some degree, you have to stretch things because if you, I mean, I think where I've set this novel, I don't think there is a lot of CCTV by the canal. There probably is in certain bits. I think as a crime novelist, sometimes you've just got to ignore those kind of things because I don't write books that are particularly that pay particular attention to police procedure in any case. And that's not for me the most important part of it. So yes, at some point you might think, well, I'm not sure they'd get away with that, but I can live with that. I think crime novelists in general have to be much more careful than television writers. So I think generally we're much more accurate than the likes of CSI. So I don't feel too bad about it.
That's great. Okay, so this is an anonymous question. What's the role of your editor in organizing, polishing, creating the final product?
Well, I have to say that for the last two novels, my editors, I have an editor in the UK and an editor in New York, have done a lot of work, I think. The books went back and forth a few times. I really like my editors and I'm hugely reliant on them for feedback because sometimes I don't think my instincts are necessarily the best. So I think generally that the stories are very much mine, but sometimes you do need somebody to sort of steer you in the right direction. So yes, there'll be sentence level polishing, a lot of that, but also sometimes you need somebody to help you if you've sort of written yourself into a corner and you can't see a way out. So, I mean, it is a huge help to have a good editor. I mean, there is always a point when I get my editorial notes back when I'm so angry I can barely speak. But then if you wait sort of 24 hours and let them sort of digest, you're like, oh yes, I guess they do have a point about that. And, you know, and then there's a dialogue and it's actually a really nice part of the writing process, I think.
This question is for another process question. Do you have several ideas for novels at one time, or are you choosing from among options, or are you just writing the book that has to be written at that moment?
I think now I do. I mean, I do tend to have quite a lot of ideas. There'll be files and notebooks with lots and lots and lots of ideas, not particularly developed ones, but sort of the starts of things. And one of the difficult things is saying, okay, which one of these am I going to pick? Because you've got to pick something that you can see through. And I've had one notable occasion before I wrote So Fire Burning, I embarked on another idea. I spent a good 6-8 months on that idea and then I abandoned it, which is always a really hard moment to decide when something just really isn't working. So I think you've got to think very carefully about if you do have loads of ideas. Some people just know exactly what they're going to do, but yeah, at the moment I seem to have sort of loads of them. Oh, I could do this, or I could do that. You know, it's quite difficult to pick the one that is definitely going to be the one you see through.
I think breaking up with a book that you have spent a lot of time on must be even worse than ending an unsuccessful marriage.
Well, there is a moment of complete liberation there as well. You're like, I don't have to think about it anymore. But also, you've just wasted.
But all that sunk cost.
All that 8 months of work is down the toilet. Well, but although the thing is, I don't think it is, because I think I will probably return to some of the ideas and some of the characters and what have you from it. So I try not to think of it as a complete waste of time.
Let's see, from Carol Peterson, how did you determine you wanted to be a writer?
I wanted to be a journalist when I was a child, a teenager. I guess I lived in Africa. My dad's an academic, but he also wrote for some newspapers, and we had a lot of journalists coming and staying at the house who had lots of interesting stories about, you know, fascinating places they've been to. So that was what I wanted to do first, and that's what I went into. Journalism never really suited me particularly well. I'm not sort of bold and intrepid enough, I think, and I'm quite introverted, and actually fiction writing suits me far better. So I've always wanted to write in some form, but fiction writing actually suits my personality a lot better than journalism did.
How about you, Laura?
How did I know when I wanted to be a writer? Is that the question?
That was the question.
I was just always writing stories, and they were always pretty dark and like horrifying my mother. So I mean, it's just what I was doing all along. I turned in a story for school about a girl going out to cut wood with her dad, and she ends up killing him with the chainsaw. And my mom read it, and she was kind of concerned because I went out cutting wood with my dad every weekend with the chainsaw. She's like, okay, but you know, I got an A on it. And so I was very pleased, and I was just on that path of writing dark things fairly early on.
I was at a flea market on Sunday, and one of the booths had both a deeply distressing picture of a clown, which is, I recognize, a slight redundancy. And then on the ground next to it was a chainsaw. So it was just a twofer of creepy things you might scare people with. A question from Ascara for both of you. Who's your favorite author? Do you have a favorite?
I mean, I don't. I think I have a bunch of favorites, but Kate Atkinson's probably the writer I return to most of all. I love her. I love everything she does.
Yes, she's brilliant. And it's always something different. It's just brilliant. But Shirley Jackson's one of my favorites. And I grew up reading a lot of Ray Bradbury. So I love him, all of his short stories. But there are so many contemporary authors that I just love, like Laura Lippman and Megan Abbott and all of those. There are just so many. It's an embarrassment of riches. There's so much great stuff out there to read right now.
There certainly is, which is good. It's better to have too many options than too few. There's some seasons where okay, you just need to turn the TV off. You need to stay home from work and then just read, because I have so many books I can sell you.
Yes.
Let's see, any new questions? So, are you working on anything now?
I haven't started a new novel yet. I've got some ideas as usual, but I haven't actually sort of landed on what I'm going to start yet. How about you, Laura?
Well, I think you've earned a break.
Thank you.
A little break to enjoy yourself after this fantastic novel. Yeah, I'm about halfway through my 5th book, which is due the end of the year. So again, it's another it's a dark, creepy, rural thriller set in a small Missouri town with a meatpacking plant kind of at the heart of it. And I'm always writing about families, these dark family things, and sort of about generational abuse as well, and just trying to escape from this sort of lifestyle and this small town living in poverty, that sort of thing. But of course, there's some murder involved and a missing person.
Sounds great.
Small towns, it's just creepy by definition. Oh, okay. So a question that came up in chat rather than in the Q&A. I'm sorry, I haven't been thinking of both screens. Paula, this is a girl on the train question, if you don't mind. How did you get so entrenched in Rachel's mind as an alcoholic? As a recovering addict myself, I can say that you nailed it perfectly. I keep going back to it because it was so beautifully written.
Yeah, you know, I know people who've suffered through things, some of the things that Rachel has suffered through, that we live in quite a booze-soaked culture in England. I've had occasion myself where I've done too much, done stupid things, and felt terrible the next day. And I think it's a peculiar sort of self-loathing that you can get from that sort of vague memories of yourself behaving in a way that you can't believe you would have behaved. But I think the thing that I found most horrifying, terrifying about that whole thing was the idea of the alcoholic blackout, of people who can wander around, and I've read stuff about this, you know, sort of doing things, saying things, driving a car, doing whatever, and have absolutely no memory of it the next day. That to me is just such a horrible idea. That you could wake up the next day and actually not know. So yeah, so a lot of reading, a lot of talking to people, a lot of observation, a little bit of personal experience, and then just living with that character for a long time, because I thought about her for ages, about this, you know, just how frightening it would be to do stuff and not remember it, and how vulnerable it would make you more than anything, that people could suggest things to you and you would believe them, almost like, you know, almost like being hypnotized in a way, because you wouldn't have any sort of, you don't have any defense against that if you have no memory. You can't stand up for yourself. So
Right.
yeah, I'm glad I'm glad you thought it was an accurate depiction.
So just doubling back on an earlier question, it seems to me that, I mean, while, you know, London particularly is, but so are most large cities now, is so completely ringed around with CCTV, and the limitations that must impose. In a way, part of what I think with this book and with Girl on the Train is you've got the isolation of modern urban life, and the characters who aren't limited by sort of the ordinary relationships of family and friends in a small town and a close-knit community. And a close-knit community is its own surveillance state. It's just different.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I do tend to write characters who are isolated in some way, but yeah, that disconnection from other people, that means that you don't have someone to go home to say, to just even to talk things through, or to ask them for their advice, or to support. That's Laura in particular in this novel has no support network, which is an awful place to be. You know, she keeps reaching out, and sort of her parents are useless, and she's, you know, so that is a frightening place to be, isn't it? When you're sort of on the edge of just slipping through the cracks because there's no one. And then she finds a friend, and so she is to some rescued or rescues herself. But yeah, I do think that is something another thing that fascinates me. It's that idea of being isolated, surrounded by people, and yet isolated and without someone to turn to.
well, someone to turn to, but also someone to sort of put their hand on your, you know, on your arm and say, honey, you're getting a little bit weird.
Yeah, you're drunk at home. Yeah.
Why I got roommates, you know, just left to our own devices. All right. Well, we are out of audience questions. If anybody else wants to chime in, we have maybe time for one more if someone's got one. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Danny Kaye.
Could
from
Laura
Raven
just give
Bookshop.
a quick pitch for What's Done in the Darkness before we depart, in case anybody wants to order it?
Sure. Yeah, we were just talking about isolation and small towns, and that's really a lot of what the focus of this book is about. There's a young woman whose family joins this backwoods fundamentalist church where the girls all have to wear the long dresses and be submissive and have the long hair. And the main character, Sarah Beth, would like nothing more than to escape from this isolated area in Arkansas. And while she's trying to figure out a way out of here, she's abducted from the family's roadside produce stand. And she is found alive a week later, bloodied alongside the interstate. And she had been kept in the dark the whole time, didn't know who had done this to her. And her story is really kind of disbelieved by the local police, and her parents are kind of see her as tainted after this. And so this kind of leads her to a new life outside of the Ozarks. She is able to escape through this trauma, but the book really begins 5 years later when she gets a phone call, and this investigator thinks that her case is related to the case of another girl who's gone missing, a girl very much like her down in the Ozarks. And so he wants to drag her back to the last place she wants to go and kind of face all of her darkest fears and try to help find this missing girl.
Sounds fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, hello, I'm Danny Kane from the Raven Bookstore in Lawrence, Kansas, and I just wanted to extend a hearty thank you to both Paula and Laura. That was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your depth and the inside look at the writing process for both of you. I really enjoyed it, and I know I'm speaking for everyone in the audience when I say that too. So thanks and congrats on the new books. Thank you also to the bookstore partners on this event. We at the Raven, we're proud and honored to team with Mystery to Me, Valley Bookseller, Rakestraw Books, Excelsior Bay Books for presenting this event. It was just wonderful to work with all of you, and of course Skylark Books in Columbia. We were thrilled to work together. We had a lot of fun. It's great. And thanks to all of you for taking time out of your day to join us for this virtual event. All of the bookstores I just mentioned have books by both authors. I encourage you to share and patronize them in that way. And we all also have events, both virtual and maybe even in person coming up. So I encourage you to check out the events from all of the bookstore partners on this event. Thanks to Riverhead Books for sending Paula Hawkins to us. And I hope you all have a great day. Thanks so much. Bye. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.